Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the dim, dust-heavy halls of a Roman library, where you are about to start your first full day as a slightly underpaid, definitely underappreciated custodian of papyrus. You blink into the space, seeing shards of morning light bounce off shelves, stacked so high they could practically file for cloud citizenship. The dust is thick enough that if you inhale too enthusiastically, you'll taste 2 centuries of other people's reading habits. And honestly, you probably won't survive this if you have even mild allergies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you settle in, go ahead and tell me your location and the local time where you're tuning in from. I love seeing the little constellation of night owls scattered around the world now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, dust already gathering on your sandals like clingy little ghosts of yesterday's scroll traffic. The first thing you learn, no one warns you about this, by the way, is that Roman dawn duties aren't glamorous. You don't stroll into the library like some serene academic. No, you trudge. You heft a broom made of stiff plant fibers that pokes your hand every few strokes. You try to look philosophical about it, nodding like you're contemplating the mysteries of the universe. But really, you're just trying not to sneeze. Modern joke number 1. You realize the dust is so thick, if someone invented a Roomba back then, it would have unionized within a day. Your job at this hour is to sweep the floors of the bibliotheca before the scholars arrive, not because they'll thank you Romans were notoriously stingy with librarian compliments, but because too much settled dust makes the scrolls break down faster. That's your first mainstream historical fact of the night. Papyrus hates dust almost as much as you hate waking up before sunrise. The tiny particles abrade the fibers, making the rolls brittle. So morning sweeping isn't just busy work, it's preservation. You move from room to room, brushing carefully around the wooden pigeonhole shelves. Some are full, some are missing a roll or two. And you make a mental note to check with the night attendant. There's always at least one senator who borrows scrolls like a raccoon borrows garbage lids. Historians still argue whether Roman libraries truly operated like modern lending libraries, or whether the texts were strictly in-house materials. All you know is that when a scroll goes missing, everyone looks at you like you personally fed it to a goat. You continue sweeping, and the dust is so stubborn it feels alive. And here comes the quirky tidbit for this section. Romans believed certain libraries had protective spirits, small household-type deities that guarded knowledge. So when a particularly rude dust cloud bursts upward and slaps your face, part of you wonders whether you've offended some minor scroll spirit by sweeping too aggressively. You nod an apology to the air, just in case. The light grows stronger, and you move toward the alcove where the most prestigious works sit. Big names: Homer, Plato, Virgil. You handle this area with extra care. It's the kind of place where a patrician might wander in, read half a line, declare loudly that civilization is collapsing, and then leave without putting anything back. You dust the niches gently with a cloth, humming to yourself. You imagine someone 2,000 years in the future doing the same thing over a stack of old paperbacks at a thrift store. It gives you a weird little sense of connection. But you don't get lost in that. You keep moving, shoulders already tired. And as you sweep the final corner of the reading hall, you spot something unusual: a small insect the size of a grain of rice, scuttling beneath a shelf. Bookworms weren't mythical. Some actually burrowed into papyrus. This one doesn't look like serious trouble. Yet, you make a mental note to check later. 1 worm becomes 5, 5 become 50, 50 become Y. Are half the speeches of Cicero suddenly perforated like Swiss cheese? And here comes modern joke number 2. You think, great, even the bugs are doing more reading than half the senators. You straighten up and stretch your back, which pops loudly enough to echo. You wince. It's a reminder that while people today imagine Roman librarians as serene scholars lounging in marble halls, the job is basically 40% cleaning, 30% organizing, 20% avoiding disasters, and 10% pretending you're okay with doing everything for very little credit. But at least it's quiet. Most of the time, your next duty is opening the shutters. You unlatch a wooden window and swing it out. Warm early light slips across the floor like honey poured too slowly. The dust dances in it, swirling around the scroll racks. You watch for a moment, letting the motion calm you. It's the little things, right? You tell yourself that as you willingly invite more errand, therefore more dust into the room. There's an irony here that you politely ignore. You check the humidity next. Yes, that's part of your job. Papyrus hates dampness, too, and the Romans knew it. Which is why libraries often sat high above flood-prone areas and relied on strategic ventilation. You stroll through the hall, noting which corners feel stuffier. One alcove seems particularly warm, and you frown. Warmth plus papyrus equals the ancient equivalent of your hard drive just melted. You prop the shutters wider, hoping the breeze helps. As you pace, you murmur to yourself the beginnings of what will become a very soothing librarian habit. It's basically ancient ASMR, minus the microphone tapping. You make your way toward the central table to check the writing materials left out overnight. A few wax tablets sit scattered, their surfaces scribbled with notes from yesterday's readers. Most are harmless comments about needing a better translation. Complaints about the lighting, one attempt at drawing an anatomical diagram that you sincerely hope is educational. You clean the tablets by gently heating and smoothing them. Your fingers glide over the soft wax, and the world grows pleasantly quiet again. You finish up by inspecting the scroll racks. You pull each roll slightly outward, checking its edge for fraying. A few look rough, and you'll need to send them to the repair desk later. One scroll even has a faint scorch mark, probably from a lantern accident. You sigh. Fire is your worst enemy here. It's the big unspoken threat. And although this isn't the section for fire, you still tense a little when you smell the old burn. You tuck that roll aside, giving it a reassuring pat like it's a nervous cat. Modern joke number 3 drifts in lazily. You wonder how, with all this dust, this place hasn't spontaneously combusted from sheer irony. You return to the entrance hall as footsteps echo outside. The scholars will arrive soon. You've swept, dusted, opened, inspected. You've negotiated with invisible library spirits and tiny worms. You've prevented at least 3 potential crises, and it isn't even midday. You take a slow breath, letting the cool morning air fill your lungs. The library feels calmer now, organized, ready, and so are you. You barely have time to savor the brief, smug satisfaction of a clean floor before the next wave of librarian life hits you, scroll sorting the moment the first scholar drifts through the doorway half-awake. Fully dramatic, you brace yourself. Because now begins what you secretly call the survival dance. And yes, dance is exactly the right word. There are steps. There is choreography. There is the constant risk of dropping something priceless and pretending it was part of the routine. You move toward the main sorting table, already crowded with scrolls, returned in a state that can only be described as light intellectual chaos. Some are loosely rolled, some too tightly rolled, and one is rolled around what appears to be someone's lunch skewer. You untangle it gently, telling yourself not to judge. But really, if someone can read Tacitus while snacking on roasted chickpeas without mixing the two, they deserve a medal. You pick up the first scroll, feeling its texture smooth but slightly fibrous. This one's papyrus is still healthy. You skim the title written on the protruding tag, The City Bows. Mainstream historical fact time. These tags were absolutely real. Little parchment or papyrus labels tied to the ends of scrolls. So librarians, like you didn't have to unravel 50 feet of philosophy just to find book 4. You hold the tag closer. The ink is fading. Typical. Roman ink was carbon-based, good for permanence, but not great when exposed to constant handling. Sunlight and the sweat of nervous senators pretending they had read the assignment. You place that scroll into its designated pigeonhole, sliding it in with the same tenderness you'd give a sleeping kitten. Because if it frays, cracks, or squashes, guess whose fault it becomes? Hint, it's yours. Always yours. The next scroll you lift is brittle around the edges. You hum under your breath a tiny warning song to yourself. You need both hands for this one. You rotate it slowly, inspecting the papyrus seam where one sheet was glued to the next. Sometimes the old paste weakens. Sometimes the scroll decides it's tired of existence. Historians still argue whether every library had designated repair specialists or whether the average Roman librarians simply did their own triage. But you know one thing. Right now, you are absolutely the specialist. Like it or not, you set the damaged scroll aside for later repair and pick up another. This one's tag is missing entirely. Classic, you sigh. Squint at the handwriting inside and try to match it to the correct text. There's a lot of which philosopher complained most about society to sift through. So identifying a scroll by tone alone becomes one of your weird talents. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. Some Roman librarians were said to memorize the smell of certain collections, like how different batches of papyrus or certain inks carried unique scents. And honestly, you believe it. Scrolls soaked up the aromas of rooms, oils, even the sweat of readers. Some smelled scholarly, some smelled questionable. You sort another scroll alphabetically, well, the Roman version of alphabetically, then another by subject area. The classification system isn't perfect. Sometimes you find medical texts filed next to poetry because someone insisted they were emotionally linked. You roll your eyes. You're pretty sure that same scholar misfiled a military treatise among comedic plays last week. Modern joke number 1 for this section arrives naturally. You think that if Dewey himself saw this place, he'd pack his bags, move to Britain, and become a shepherd instead. You continue sorting, and soon your table looks halfway civilized. But then you spot a scroll whose papyrus casing is far too fresh, crisp, smooth, suspiciously undusty. You feel your stomach drop. This is a new copy, and new copies mean someone somewhere made the bold decision that you would be the one to verify it's correct. You unroll it carefully, just a hand's width. Too fast and the papyrus might snap. Too slow and the scholars will assume you're incompetent. You scan the text. The scribe's handwriting is neat, but creatively spaced. A few lines look cramped. Some accents hover in places that feel more artistic than linguistic. And then you spot it. A repeated sentence. You groan internally. The scribe must have accidentally copied the same line twice common when working by lamplight. You re-roll the scroll and set it aside for correction. Your pile is getting taller. Your patience is growing thinner. Your back is starting to whisper threats. As you work, scholars wander through, asking questions like, "Do you have that one scroll? You know? The one with the thing." You smile politely, because sarcasm is not considered a professional skill here. You direct them to sections you think they need, watching like a stressed parent as they handle the scrolls with all the delicacy of a toddler holding a glass ornament. One scholar brings you a scroll he claims is out of order. You look at the shelf he points to, and immediately see the issue. He put an astronomy scroll with the agronomy section. You ask gently, "Did you place this here?" He answers confidently, "No." You both know he did, but you put it back anyway, bowing to the sacred Roman principle of never telling a patron they messed up. Modern joke. Modern joke number 2. You realize even in ancient times, people returned things to the wrong shelf like it was a competitive sport. Your sorting continues into the late morning. The dust returns faster than you clean it, like a clingy ex who just wants one more chat. You keep working. Roll, tag, categorize, Shelf. Occasionally you sneeze, which echoes dramatically through the marble halls. A senator glances your way, mildly offended that a human sound dared intrude on his reading. But then something nice happens. You find your favorite scroll, a commentary with marginal doodles from a reader long gone. Someone sketched a cat next to a difficult passage, maybe as a reminder, maybe as a joke. You smile. It's a weird comfort, knowing some ancient reader had the same impulse to doodle in the margins that people today have in notebooks. Human nature doesn't change much. You carefully reshelve that one in its place, knowing you'll probably sneak a peek at the little cat again later on a bad day. As you turn, you catch a beam of light sliding across the reading tables. Dust dances around it like tiny golden specks. And even though you've been wrestling with labels, scrolls, mismatched tags, and mysterious misplaced texts all morning, the sight calms you. You move to the last part of the sorting ritual, the reading room rotation. People leave scrolls everywhere, on tables, benches, even the floor, if they're particularly absent. You gather them one by one, checking their tags, smoothing their edges. One scroll is oddly warm, likely held for a long time by a sweaty scholar. You wipe it down with a dry cloth, because moisture equals danger. Papyrus is tough, but not tough enough to handle the combined humidity of 20 anxious readers. By midday, you've returned dozens of scrolls to their rightful places. The room looks orderly again. Your sorting table is clear. The shelves stand tall and precise. You stretch your fingers, which feel slightly cramped from all the delicate handling. Then you step back, surveying your work with a faint sense of pride. You've survived the survival dance once more. No scrolls torn. No catastrophic no scholars yelling. And only one moment where you questioned your life choices. The day isn't over, far from it. But for now, you breathe. You let the quiet hum of the library settle into your bones, and you move on. You glide from the sorting tables into the scriptorium like someone entering a sacred battlefield, quiet, tense, and full of people pretending their work is more glamorous than it is. The moment your sandals touch the threshold, the smell hits you. Warm ink, old papyrus, and that faint tang of lamp smoke. It's the scent equivalent of coffee for Roman librarians, comforting, slightly alarming, and dangerously close to igniting something if you're not careful. Scribes are already lined up at their desks, hunched, squinting, and scribbling at speeds that make you wonder whether they secretly practice at night. You step between them, gently, because every elbow bump is a potential disaster worth at least 4 apologies. Your job here is deceptively simple. Keep them supplied, keep them calm, and keep them from copying texts so poorly that future scholars assume the Romans were barely literate. And also, avoid dripping wax, spilled ink, and abrupt emotional breakdowns, 3 things that tend to happen simultaneously when someone realizes they misspelled a name halfway through a paragraph. You stand beside the first scribe, a wiry man with the permanent scowl of someone who has seen too many poorly formatted manuscripts. He gestures to his almost empty ink pot. You nod and prepare a fresh mix. Here comes your mainstream historical fact. Roman ink was typically made from soot, gum, Arabic, and water. Simple, sturdy, and bold unless the mixture was off by even a tiny bit. Then it either smudged like a cheap mascara, or dried to a crusty film resembling burnt olives. You grind the soot gently, adding water in slow drops until the ink becomes smooth and silky. The scribe watches you like a hawk. You know that he's silently judging your mixing technique. You resist the urge to wink at him just to see the panic. Once satisfied, you fill his pot. He gives a grunt that counts as thank you in scribe language, and resumes copying lines from a scroll you delivered earlier. You lean over to check his handwriting. Even measured, tinged with the slight rightward tilt that was fashionable among educated Romans. You whisper a quiet encouragement, and he relaxes by exactly 1 eyebrow width. Progress at the next desk. Another scribe is battling with a papyrus sheet that refuses to lie flat. You smooth its edges, like a parent smoothing a child's hair before school. Then you check his ink. It's too thick. Water, you ask. He nods sheepishly. You drizzle a few drops, swirl the pot, test the viscosity, and hand it back. He resumes working with renewed determination, as though the gods themselves have blessed his pen. Modern joke number 1 arrives. Naturally, as you watch him copy line after line, you think, this is basically the ancient version of binge typing an essay at 3 a.m., except there's no undo button, so the stakes are terrifying. You continue through the rows, offering guidance where needed, and mental support everywhere else. The scriptorium is a strange ecosystem, half workplace, half quiet room therapy session. You're part supervisor, part supply runner, and part emotional buffer against existential dread. You approach another table where a young scribe gestures frantically. You lean in. His ink has begun to clump, leaving gritty streaks across the sheet. You give him a sympathetic nod. This is what happens when the soot isn't ground finely enough. You take his pot, rework the mixture, and hand it back. He whispers a heartfelt blessing to you. You accept. A hush falls as a librarian assistant rolls in a new set of scrolls that need copying, some damaged, some incomplete, some so faded they may as well be written in ghost handwriting. Everyone stiffens. New assignments means longer hours, tighter deadlines, and more papyrus anxiety. You pick up the topmost scroll to deliver it to the next available scribe. As you unroll it, dust puffs softly into the air. You cough, not dramatically, but just enough for your eyes to water. The text is faint. You squint. Then you carry it like a newborn to the only person who can handle something this delicate. An older scribe with the patience of a saint and the posture of a collapsing camp stool. He studies it, nods, rolls his shoulders, and begins. You keep moving. Here comes the quirky tidbit for this section. Some Roman scribes used a technique where they lightly traced letters with a dry stylus before inking them. It was like ancient outlining, useful, subtle, and invisible once the ink dried. You glance over and catch one of your scribes doing exactly that, his stylus tapping softly as he marks the guidelines. Meanwhile, an argument brews at the far end of the room. Two scribes are locked in whispered debate about whether a certain passage should be copied as is, or updated to reflect current political attitudes. You step in before voices rise. This is library territory. No yelling aloud, unless the building is literally on fire. You listen, nod, and deliver your diplomatic verdict. Copy the original. Add a small note. Let the scholars argue about it later. This satisfies no one and everyone at the same time. Just another day in Roman academia. As you circulate, you spot a scribe, rubbing his temples. You ask if he's well. He mutters something about letters, dancing like Spartans after wine. I strain Israel here. No spectacles. No magnifying glasses. Just determination and occasional despair. You slip him a small dish of diluted vinegar, an old remedy for tired eyes. Whether it truly works or is simply ancient placebo, historians still argue whether this practice actually improved vision or just made the scribe feel momentarily refreshed. Either way, he gratefully pats your forearm. Modern joke number 2. You think that if Romans had coffee, half the empire's philosophical texts would be twice as long and 3 times as jittery. As noon approaches, the room grows warmer. Lamps flicker. Ink thickens. The scratching of pens becomes a rhythmic chorus, steady and hypnotic. You find yourself swaying slightly, half dozing on your feet. Then disaster. A scribe's stylus slips. A blot of ink lands on the papyrus like an ink-black sun. He freezes. Everyone senses it. Even the dust motes pause mid-air like tiny scandal reporters. You hurry over. The scribe looks ready to cry. You inspect the damage. The blood is bad, but not catastrophic. You place your hand on his shoulder, whisper reassurance, and show him how to carefully scrape the top. Layer of papyrus fibers with a sharp shell. An old trick that can sometimes lighten a stain just enough to rewrite over it. He tries. It works. Barely. But it works. He exhales. So do you. The rhythm resumes. As you move again, a faint breeze sneaks in from an open window, fluttering a loose page. You pin it down quickly and shut the wooden shutter. Wind is an enemy here. Wind carries dust. Dust clings to ink. Ink smears. Smears ruin lives. One of your last tasks for the afternoon is inventory. You check the ink stores too low, the reed pen supply also too low, and the papyrus stack laughably low. You jot down requests for resupply, fully aware the quartermaster will probably ignore half of them and replace the other half with whatever is cheapest. Modern. Joke number 3. You think, not for the first time, that ancient budget committees must have been invented solely to test human patience by the time you make your final rounds. The room feels like a gentle storm of concentration, pens scraping, pages whispering, minds churning. You admire them. The scribes, the scrolls, the quiet labor that keeps knowledge alive. You gather the completed sheets, stack them carefully, and store them in a drying rack away from wandering hands. Tomorrow, you'll bind them into a fresh copy. Tonight, you'll make sure they dry without curling. Your part in this room isn't glamorous, but it's essential. Without you, the ink would dry wrong. The papyrus would buckle. The scribes would starve emotionally. And half the empire's literature would dissolve into creative spelling errors. You give the room one last glance. Soft light. Bent heads, steady hands. Step out quietly. Your day is just warming up. You leave the scriptorium and step into the main reading hall, where the air shifts from ink-heavy concentration to a very different kind of tension, the social kind. Out here, knowledge doesn't quietly sit on desks. It struts, gossips, debates, complains, and occasionally threatens to trip over its own sandal straps. You breathe in a lungful of lamp-warmed air and brace yourself. This right here is where your job stops being calm, scroll tending, and starts becoming emotional crowd control. You slip between columns as you approach the first table, where a senator in a spotless white toga is pretending to read, while very obviously scanning the room for people who might be impressed by his reading. His toga is so bright, it's reflecting light like a polished shield. You shield your eyes politely and ask if he needs anything. He taps a scroll with exaggerated dignity and asks whether you have a newer copy. Newer, as though scrolls come in seasonal fashion releases. Still, you nod and politely explain that papyrus does not age like wine, and the newest version you have is already on his table. He forces a thoughtful awe sound and nods as though you've just told him something quite profound. You glide away before he asks follow-up questions that will cause your soul to leak out of your ears. At the next table, 3 scholars are already deep in debate. You can tell from 20 steps away, because their voices carry just slightly too loudly like someone whisper yelling during a movie. They're arguing over an obscure detail in a historical treatise, and you sense it's going to escalate into those wonderfully useless disputes scholars love. The mainstream historical fact slides right in here. Roman libraries were often filled with senators, scholars, and statesmen, treating them like miniature academies, places to read, lecture, and loudly prove intellectual dominance. You approach calmly and clear your throat. They pause. You smile your soft librarian smile, the one that says, "Please lower your voices before I have to pretend I'm not stressed." They nod sheepishly and resume their argument at a gentler volume. Modern joke number 1 comes naturally. You think that if these scholars had access to online comment sections, they'd probably never leave their homes, and the library would be strangely peaceful. You check on a pair of students at the far table. They're both leaning so close to the scroll they look like they're trying to crawl inside it. One is tracing lines with his finger. The other is whispering to himself, trying to memorize them word for word. You admire their dedication right up until one of them sneezes directly over the text. You yank the scroll away a split second before disaster strikes and give him a please sneeze at the wall, like a civilized human look. He apologizes profusely. As you continue walking, you pass by a tiny side room reserved for more private study. Someone is in there snoring loudly. You peek inside and find a scholar slumped over a table with a scroll stuck to his cheek like a sad, crunchy pillow. You gently peel it off, place a little cloth under his head, and drape the scroll safely away from drool range. Scholars fall asleep here more often than they admit. The soft lamplight, the warm air, the endless reading. It's basically an ancient ASMR lounge. Now here comes your quirky historical tidbit. Some Roman elites believed that simply being inside a library made them appear wiser, even if they never actually read anything. A few even had portraits made of themselves posing beside scrolls they never opened. You chuckle to yourself as you pass a noblewoman who's doing exactly that, sitting very still. Scroll open, eyes not moving, trying to look like she's contemplating the secrets of the universe. Her earrings are doing more thinking than she is. You continue making rounds, but trouble begins brewing near the back wall. You can feel it before you even see it. A hush, a ripple of awkward glances, some shuffling sandals. Then you spot the problem. Two well-educated aristocrats, pretending not to glare at each other, while sitting uncomfortably close at the same table. They're both reaching for the same scroll. You sigh internally. The shared resource dispute, the bane of every librarian's existence. Since the dawn of shelves, you slide into the space between them like a peace negotiator. "Gentlemen," you say, "we have several copies of this text." Which is true, you do, somewhere. Probably, you hope. You promise to retrieve another copy, and you skillfully whisk the first scroll away before either of them can lunge for it. On your way to fetch that second copy, you pass by a philosopher who is doing what philosophers do, best monologuing to anyone within 5 feet. He's pacing slowly, hands clasped behind his back, explaining some grand thesis that may or may not involve geometry, destiny, and the meaning of bread. His audience consists of one exhausted student and a very confused pigeon perched on the window ledge. You give the bird a sympathetic nod. It coos in solidarity. You retrieve a duplicate scroll and return to the feuding aristocrats. They accept it with stiff, polite nods, both pretending they weren't just seconds away from wrestling over papyrus like toddlers over a wooden toy. Modern joke number 2. You think the library should have a rule. If your toga costs more than 3 months of your scribe's salary, you must share nicely. You resume patrolling the aisles. Someone taps your shoulder. It's an elderly scholar with eyebrows so bushy they cast shadows. He asks you a complicated question about an obscure author whose works survive only in fragments. Historians still argue whether that author even existed or was just a convenient pen name for multiple writers. You explain this gently, and the old scholar nods with deep approval, as if you have passed some esoteric academic test. He pats your arm, leaving a faint dust print at another table. 2 teenagers are giggling over a comedic poem. You let them. Knowledge should sometimes be fun, but when their whispering becomes excited commentary, you give them the soft she, not the aggressive, soul-piercing one, just the mild one that says, "We're all trying to pretend this place is dignified." You take a moment to step back and watch the whole hall in motion. Scholars debating, students scribbling notes, nobles pretending to read, sleepers snoring, pigeons judging. It's chaos disguised as scholarship, but it's living, breathing intellectual chaos, and you help keep it balanced. A young assistant rushes toward you and nearly collides with your shoulder. He's holding a scroll backwards and upside down. You write it for him, pat his sleeve, and send him on his way. He blushes crimson. You remember your first week here. You spilled an entire pot of ink on your own foot and told everyone it was decorative. They did not believe you. As the afternoon sun warms the walls, readers grow restless. Some leave. Others shuffle in. You fetch scrolls, answer questions, and resolve minor crises with the patience of a half-asleep riverstone. Slowly, the hall settles into gentle hums and murmurs. Modern joke number 3. You catch yourself thinking that the library needs a suggestion box. But then imagine the nightmare of reading it. As you guide another scholar to a scroll she requested, the lamp smoke drifts lazily overhead. It reminds you of the scriptorium's ink fumes, and you realize your day is drifting toward its next phase. You pause at the center of the hall, take a slow breath, and let the sound wash over you. Soft steps, hushed voices, rustling papyrus. It's messy. It's exhausting. It's occasionally ridiculous, but it's also beautiful. Your job isn't just about dusty scrolls. It's about the people who come seeking something: knowledge, validation, escape, peace, and the quiet, careful work of making sure they find it. You turn toward the next doorway. Time to face the nightmares that threaten the scrolls themselves. You don't get more than a few steps past the colonnade before you hear it. The unmistakable sound of tiny claws skittering somewhere behind the stacked crates of papyrus paste. You freeze because you know that sound. Every Roman librarian knows that sound, and you wish you didn't. You inch closer, holding your breath like you're sneaking up on a sleeping lion, even though what's back there is much worse for your sanity. A mouse, or worse. Plural. Hey. Nobody told you when you signed up for this job that you'd become the mortal enemy of creatures whose life goals include eating, nesting, and reproducing at speeds that historians still argue whether Roman farmers exaggerated in their complaints. Either way, every time you hear that scratching, your heart drops like someone just told you all the scrolls were being reorganized alphabetically by reverse author birthplace. Nobody needs that stress. You crouch, squinting, your muscles tensed like you're about to leap into an Olympic event. Rodent removal. Librarian division. That's when you spot it. A tiny papyrus shred, gnawed on the edges. The kind of thing that makes you want to lie on the floor and reevaluate every life choice that brought you here. Because this is not just paper. This is literature, knowledge, centuries of brilliance that some little furry snack goblin has decided to treat like it's a free charcuterie board. You stand, sigh dramatically, because that's part of your skill set. No, and go fetch one of your traps. The humane kind, of course. Though humane is relative when your natural predator instincts flare up every time you see whiskers. One of your colleagues last week swore that he saw a rat the size of his forearm. You doubt the accuracy. Historians still argue whether Roman rodents actually grew that big, or if people just loved dramatic storytelling. But judging from those teeth marks you found yesterday, you're not ruling anything out. And rodents aren't even your biggest problem. Not by a long shot. As you cross the main hall, a faint whiff of something smoky brushes against your nose. You freeze again. This day is just full of fun surprises, huh? And your pulse jumps. Because smoke, inside a library full of ultra-flammable papyrus scrolls, is the librarian equivalent of hearing someone yell fire. In a fireworks factory, you sniff the air again. It's faint, barely there, but enough to get your nerves tingling. You trace the scent to a pair of oil lamps on the wall. One has a flame that's just a little too tall, licking upward like it's auditioning for a role in some tragic historical reenactment. You swear under your breath PG-13, something like by Jupiter's dusty sandals. Grab a bronze snuffer and lower the flame with the tenderness of someone handling an angry snake. Fire is your nightmare. Fire is the nightmare. You live in a world without backup copies, without cloud storage, without someone emailing you a PDF of the lost works of Sappho. If something burns, It's gone forever, and you'll spend the rest of your career hearing people blame you. If only you'd been watching the lamps, we'd still have book 27 of that epic no one remembers. You already know the mainstream historical fact your supervisor loves to repeat. Roman libraries strictly managed their lighting because the combination of oil lamps and scrolls was, generously speaking, a terrible idea. It's why lamps were strategically placed, limited in number, and often separated from reading rooms. But today, someone clearly got careless. You lower the wick, straighten the lamp, and take a slow breath. Crisis avoided. No blaze today. Good, because you probably wouldn't survive the paperwork. You barely have time to enjoy that small victory before you notice another issue. The dampness in the corner niche. You walk over, poke the dark patch on the wall, and instantly regret touching it. Moisture, mold's best friend. That subtle creeping decay that works slowly, silently, like it's trying to give fire a run for its money, as most destructive enemy of knowledge. You lean in and examine the scrolls stored nearby. They look fine for now, but you can't take chances. Roman librarians had a whole anti-mold system, ventilation shafts, periodic airing sessions, sunning scrolls briefly, but never too long, because papyrus hates intense heat the way you hate surprise inventory audits. It's both science and a kind of ritual dance. Luckily, today you only need to relocate a few rolls. But once mold starts, you're in for hours of tedious drying, cleaning, scraping, and complaining dramatically to anyone who'll listen. You shift the scrolls to a safer shelf, reminding yourself that timidity is your eternal nemesis. Honestly, between fire, rodents, and dampness, you're starting to think the library should get hazard pay. But there's one more threat, a subtle one. One most visitors never even think about people specifically. Clumsy people, as you turn around. You spot a scholar leaning way too close to a shelf as he gestures wildly at another researcher. His elbow misses a stack of scrolls by the width of a hair. You sprint shuffle quickly in a dignified librarian manner toward him and gently redirect his arms before disaster strikes. You paste on your polite, strained smile. Maybe, keep your arms tucked in while debating Aristotle, yeah? He apologizes, and you give him a reassuring nod even though inside you're screaming. You know the quirky tidbit here. Some Roman libraries actually had attendants whose whole job was to watch visitors like hawks, ensuring nobody mishandled the scrolls. Human chaos prevention. You're basically a bouncer, but instead of throwing people out of a bar, you stop them from accidentally destroying 300 years of political discourse because they talk with dramatic hands. Just as things calm down, you catch a flicker of movement above. You glance upward. A pigeon sits smugly near one of the high windows, feathers ruffling like it owns the place. No, absolutely not, you mutter. Birds are not supposed to be inside the library. Birds do not respect boundaries. Birds do not respect papyrus. However the little menace got in, you're going to have to get it out before it does something unforgivable. Like relieving itself on a scroll. You grab a broom because this is now your life hand. Gently guide the bird toward the window. It flaps around, sending feathers drifting like sad confetti from a celebration you never wanted. Eventually it escapes, leaving you with your heart pounding and your dignity in question. Great, another crisis handled. And it's not even mid-afternoon. You take a deep breath, glance at the shelves, the lamps, the corners, the windows. Everything is stable, for now. But working in a Roman library means you're always hyper-aware. That disaster can happen anytime. You're always listening, always sniffing the air, always scanning for motion, like some kind of ancient superhero whose powers are mild paranoia and deep knowledge of timidity. Still, despite everything, you feel oddly proud. You're the thin line between chaos and preservation, between knowledge and oblivion. Every time you catch a spark, a mouse, a drip of moisture, or a clumsy elbow. You're quietly saving history, and nobody even knows, but you do. And that's enough to keep you going. For now. By the time you've wrangled the pigeon, soothed your frayed nerves, and restored a basic sense of order, you're secretly hoping the rest of the day will be boring, quiet, predictable. But being a Roman librarian, you know better. The universe rarely gives you boring. Instead, it gives you something far more stressful, sensitive texts. You step toward the restricted alcove. Yes, restricted, because even ancient Rome had its version of "Are you sure you're allowed to read that?" The alcove sits behind a decorative wooden lattice that does absolutely nothing to stop people from peering through and asking suspiciously casual questions like, "So hey, what's back there?" You always answer with the same soothing line, "Scholars. Materials requiring careful handling," which is librarian code for books that could get you yelled at by someone powerful. You push aside the lattice and step inside, the air a bit cooler, the shelves neater, the scroll labels sharper. You feel your shoulders automatically straighten. This is the part of the library where you have to act extra responsibly, though deep down, you know half this room is filled with texts that absolutely should not be here. And yet, here they are. You pick up a scroll wrapped with red cord. Nothing dramatic. Red just signals. Ask permission. It contains a political commentary from a senator who got on the wrong side of an emperor 70 years ago. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Roman libraries often included state-approved works, but librarians sometimes kept suppressed texts tucked away for scholars who were trusted or discreet. Knowledge was valuable, and erasing it didn't always mean it vanished. Sometimes it just migrated to the least shady corner it could find. You gently set the scroll down and glance at the small cubby behind it, the one that looks empty unless you know to look for the thin vertical seam. You slide your finger along the edge and pop open the secret panel. Yes, that panel, the one your predecessor whispered about. Don't open it unless you really need to, like if the prefect visits, or if someone asks about the banned poet again. You pull it open and peek inside. 2 scrolls, carefully wrapped, hidden. You don't take them out. You don't even touch them. You just check that they're still dry, still safe, and still tucked away where they won't cause political migraines. Historians still argue whether Roman librarians were quiet rebels, dutiful neutral parties, or simply trying not to lose their jobs while navigating imperial temper tantrums. You suspect the answer is somewhere in the middle, because you absolutely understand the art of nodding politely while thinking, "Sure, I'll pretend I didn't see that." You close the panel softly. But of course, someone chooses this moment to enter the alcove. It's a young scholar, bright-eyed, toga perfectly arranged, hair curled just enough to show he's aiming for charmingly intellectual. You brace yourself. Scholars like him are guaranteed trouble, not because they're malicious, but because they're curious. And in a Roman library, curiosity is like walking around holding a lit torch while insisting I know what I'm doing. "Excuse me," he whispers, which is librarian code for "I'm about to request something unreasonable." He leans in. "Do you have the later writings of Callistus? The ones about imperial morality?" You smile the tight smile of someone who absolutely does, but should absolutely not hand them out like bakery samples. "Those works aren't available for general reading," you say, keeping your tone airy, almost apologetic. But the scholar isn't deterred. They never are. He tries again, voice dropping conspiratorially. "I heard some copies survived here. Hidden copies." You blink once, twice. "No hidden copies exist," you reply, channeling the serene energy of a temple statue. "Only authorized materials." He nods, but you can see the disappointment sliding across his face. He'll ask again someday. They always do. For now, though, he wanders off and you exhale. You stroll deeper into the alcove, checking that all sensitive texts are still where they're supposed to be. There's the philosophical treatise banned for encouraging too much free thought. because the empire really didn't like when people started asking why things were the way they were. There's the medical scroll containing a recipe involving substances modern people would call absolutely not safe. And then there's your personal favorite, the scroll of questionable jokes, attributed to a playwright who definitely wrote them after one too many cups of wine. You keep that one because it's harmless. But if a senator saw it, the library would suddenly be involved in a cultural scandal. You're halfway into rearranging a shelf when you feel the presence behind you. The prefect. Not a guard, not a scholar, the prefect overseeing cultural affairs. His sandals make very specific, very self-important sounds that echo through the alcove, like drumbeats of impending paperwork. "Librarian," he says, in the tone of someone expecting trouble. You bow your head slightly, trying not to radiate guilt about a secret panel he definitely doesn't know exists. "Prefect, how may I assist? I've received concerns," he announces, as if delivering a prophecy, "that some materials circulating in the city may have originated here." Your stomach dips, not drops, just dips, like it's testing anxiety levels. "What sort of materials?" you ask. He lists a few topics, most innocuous, but one of them is dangerously close to the scroll behind your hidden panel. You remain calm, nodding thoughtfully, as if he's talking about weather patterns. "We only provide texts on the official catalog," you say, which is technically true, even if the catalog strategically leaves off a few items. He studies your face. You hold your expression steady. You've practiced this look in reflective bronze trays for moments like this. Finally, he nods, satisfied. "Good. Maintain order. Knowledge must be curated responsibly." "Yes, Prefect," you reply. He leaves, footsteps fading. You wait until you're sure he's gone before letting out the breath you were holding. You rest your forehead briefly against the nearest shelf, not enough to damage anything. You've learned your lesson about elbows and murmur. "I am absolutely not paid enough for this." But then something unexpected happens. A small scroll slips from the top of the shelf, landing softly at your feet. You pick it up, unroll it halfway, and laugh quietly. It's an old poem about censorship, written in metaphors so tangled even the prefect wouldn't understand it. The universe has a wicked sense of humor sometimes. You reshelve everything, step back through the lattice, and return to the main hall. You feel strangely lighter, tired, yes, mentally singed, spiritually rumpled, but lighter. You've saved knowledge again, protected ideas again, outwitted both scholars and officials, without spilling anything, breaking anything, or causing international incident-level chaos. And even though you'd never admit it out loud, the subtle rebellion is kind of fun. You leave the restricted alcove with a quiet sense of satisfaction, and for a moment, the library seems peaceful, almost serene. Almost, but Roman libraries have a rhythm, a pulse, and you know it. The calm only lasts until someone attempts the next minor disaster. Today, it's maintenance time, which means you're about to become intimately familiar with the delicate choreography of cleaning scrolls without making them disintegrate in your hands. You gather a small kit, soft brushes, cloths, a few pots of water for misting, and the occasional tool for pressing warped papyrus. The mainstream historical fact here is that Roman librarians actually developed specialized cleaning techniques for scrolls. They didn't just dust things and hope for the best. They used gentle brushing, light misting, and careful flattening to prevent both mold and brittle tears. Your life depends on these techniques, not because someone is breathing down your neck, but because one slip can turn centuries of work into confetti. You kneel at the first shelf. Dust rises like a fine golden mist. You inhale and shiver slightly, because papyrus dust is deceptively irritating, tickling your nose and throat. You gently run your brush along the edges, taking care not to press too hard. One wrong movement and the fibers could fray beyond repair. You've learned to move slowly, deliberately, almost like you're performing a tiny ritual. Every swipe matters. A scribe wanders over, curious. He wants to know if the scroll he finished copying yesterday is ready for rebinding. You tell him, almost. But you'll need to let it settle overnight. He frowns. You can almost hear him thinking, in my day, patience was a virtue I barely understood. You smile faintly. Patience is a virtue you've cultivated, because the alternative is screaming at things that cannot respond like scrolls, dust, and occasionally your own eyebrows. You pause to note something quirky. Some librarians actually kept tiny labels, almost like modern sticky notes, attached with threads to mark particularly fragile or interesting scrolls. These markers were an early form of cataloging, a subtle signal to both yourself and future librarians that this scroll is special. Treat it like royalty. You glance at one marked with a faded golden thread and murmur, royalty indeed. You've survived longer than my patience would allow. As you continue your rounds, you catch the faint sound of someone muttering. A scholar is reciting lines aloud, apparently forgetting that a library is not a theater. The voice echoes faintly, bouncing off marble and plaster. You sigh. Historians still argue whether reading aloud in Roman libraries was encouraged as a learning aid or quietly tolerated despite the obvious distraction to others. Either way, you shuffle over, gently tap his shoulder, and remind him that whispers suffice. He nods, abashed, and his voice lowers to a gentle hum like a distant flute. You move to another shelf, where a stack of scrolls seems slightly crooked. This is your cue for minor engineering work. Pressing, aligning, and restacking without triggering a collapse. The slightest imbalance can lead to an avalanche of papyrus, and you've learned from bitter experience that gravity in libraries is unforgiving. You arrange, adjust, and give a final glance. Balanced. Perfect. You can almost hear the scrolls sigh in relief, or maybe that's just the lamp's heat rising. And of course, no cleaning session is complete without checking for tiny pests. You glance behind a corner where shadows gather and spot a beetle inspecting the creases of a particularly old scroll. You gently flick it aside, muttering about ancient bugs having terrible taste, and continue. The library may look tranquil, but it's full of life, sometimes helpful, sometimes disastrous, always unpredictable. Modern joke 1. You think that if future historians somehow invented reality TV, episodes like Librarian vs. Beetle would dominate streaming services. Ratings through the roof, drama guaranteed. You pause near a set of recently repaired scrolls. The edges are smoother now, but there's still a faint curl that refuses to flatten entirely. You drape a soft cloth and leave a gentle weight atop it. Patience, again. Your job is more about persistence than power. You learn to trust slow processes because the alternative rushing ends with shredded papyrus and regret. Next, you take a break, leaning against a cool column and watching sunlight spill across the reading hall. The lamp smoke mingles with the warm light, creating dancing shadows over the desks. You notice a young scholar scribbling furiously, another trying not to spill ink, and two noble women quietly comparing notes, each pretending to be more serious than the other. There's a kind of harmony in the chaos, a rhythm that only those who've spent years in this world can recognize. And somehow, you are a conductor in this silent symphony, though no one would ever realize it. You catch another glimpse of the quirky side of history. Sometimes, a scroll's owner would inscribe tiny doodles or marginal notes, personal thoughts tucked in between lines. One shows a small, crudely drawn dog chasing a butterfly in ancient librarians' version of "Don't forget to laugh" while reading. You smile at the thought. Even the most disciplined minds needed little reminders of life outside ink and papyrus. As afternoon drifts into evening, you make a final sweep, dusting corners, checking for stray debris, and ensuring that the lamp flames aren't licking the edges of nearby scrolls. Historians still argue whether the methodical care of scrolls was more about preservation or prestige. But as you trace your fingers along the edges, you feel the undeniable satisfaction of protection, of watching knowledge survive despite everything that wants to destroy it. The hall quiets further. Shadows lengthen. You pause in the center, eyes scanning shelves, scrolls, and silent figures. There's beauty here, subtle but undeniable. You're exhausted but content. And you realize that, after dust, pests, an unrelenting human curiosity. This is your favorite part, standing still, feeling the library breathe, knowing you've safeguarded it for another day. Modern joke too. You think maybe one day someone will make a video about the thrilling life of dusting scrolls. It would go viral for the sheer irony. You'd watch it, nodding solemnly, and so you breathe softly, letting the work sink in, letting the quiet fill the room. The day isn't over, but you're nearly ready for the final stretch. One last sweep, one last check. Then, perhaps, a sigh, a stool, and the distant thought of dinner. You're nearing the end of your shift, and the library is slowly slipping into that delicate, magical hour, when the last scholars linger over their texts, and the rest of the building seems to exhale. The lamps glow softly, casting long shadows across the polished stone floor, and the warm air carries just a hint of dust and ink. You trudge along the aisles, checking for loose scrolls, gently straightening corners, and occasionally reaching up to adjust a lamp that threatens to drip wax onto an unsuspecting papyrus bundle. Every movement is careful, deliberate, a final ballet of preservation before nightfall. You pause to watch a young student, eyes wide, tracing the letters of a thick scroll as if absorbing the knowledge by touch alone. There's a faint smile tugging at the corners of your mouth because you remember your own early days. Tracing letters too, feeling the thrill of connection to centuries-old thoughts. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. Roman libraries weren't just repositories of knowledge, they were living, breathing centers of learning. And the librarians were the invisible hands, keeping that pulse steady. Your attention shifts to the top shelves, where a few scrolls are beginning to curl at the edges. You climb carefully on a small step stool, gently easing each papyrus back into alignment. Dust drifts down like a golden snowstorm. You inhale, cough lightly, and keep moving. You remember that quirky detail. Some librarians would mark edges with colored threads or tiny symbols to indicate fragility or priority. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's a quiet language of care that only those attuned to it understand. You trace one of the marks, smile faintly, and continue your work. As you descend from the step, you hear the faint rustle of paper and look up. A stray breeze has teased a half-open window, letting in the evening air. A page flutters. You catch it mid-air. Scholars are too immersed to notice, but you feel a surge of quiet triumph. Small victories like this are what keep you sane. Historians still argue whether such meticulous attention to preservation was truly a conscious practice, or simply the compulsive habits of obsessive caretakers, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. You do it because it matters to the scrolls. Your gaze sweeps the room. Most of the readers are quietly packing up, rolling their papyrus, smoothing the cords, and whispering their thanks. You nod, smile faintly, and wave to a few familiar faces. Even in these final moments, the library is full of small dramas. A student trying not to tear a delicate page. A scholar debating whether to leave or continue reading a sentence one more time. And someone murmuring a quote aloud that only they understand. You take a deep breath, pat a few stacks of scrolls, and step back to the center. Your hands are ink-stained, your muscles tired, but your heart feels steady. You've guided the day from dawn to dusk, soothed tempers, chased rodents and pigeons, dusted, mended, and preserved countless fragments of thought. The quirky truth hits you. Despite all the chaos, the spills, the debates, The small disasters, the library thrives because of your vigilance and patience. Modern joke 1 drifts through your mind. If someone ever made a Roman library simulator game, you'd already be a max level player. Skills: dust dodging, scroll repair, lamp management, emotional control of scholars. High score: sanity intact. You pause, listen, and notice the faint whisper of the evening wind through the partially shuttered windows. The sounds blend: the soft scratch of ink, the shuffle of feet, the gentle sighs of readers, and the ambient hum of the building itself. It's hypnotic, comforting, a lullaby made of knowledge and care. Modern joke 2. If libraries had ASMR channels, you'd be trending immediately. Finally, you gather the last batch of scrolls that need to be reshelved overnight. You move deliberately, placing each one carefully, adjusting cords, ensuring nothing leans dangerously. The library is finally orderly, stable, quiet, ready for whatever tomorrow might throw at it. Scholars with dramatic entrances, spilled ink, or even the occasional rebellious rodent. You step to the doorway, glance back at the hall, and allow yourself a faint, satisfied sigh. The chaos has subsided. The scrolls are safe. The scholars are safe. You've navigated the quirks, the disasters, the delicate ballet of preservation and social diplomacy, and emerged victorious, if exhausted. The library will sleep now, but it's alive, humming quietly, and you've kept it that way. The day winds down. Your eyes soften as the soft light warms the walls. The faint scent of ink lingers, mingling with the last whispers of the day. You realize that though the work is endless, the act of caring, of preservation, of guiding chaos into harmony, has a quiet joy of its own. Asterisk. Now, slow your breathing and let the room soften around you. Imagine the warm glow of lamps fading into the gentle twilight, the library settling into a calm hush. The scrolls are still there, fibers relaxed, resting from the day's gentle handling. You feel your shoulders release tension you didn't know you were holding. Your eyelids heavy with the comfort of a job quietly well done. Even the lingering scent of ink and dust becomes soothing, like a promise that knowledge, once so fragile, is safe for another night. The faint hum of the evening wind slips through open shutters, curling softly around marble columns and wooden shelves. Somewhere, a pigeon settles on a rooftop, and you imagine it sighing in relief at its day's adventures. The room holds countless voices, silent now, echoing faintly like distant waves. You can almost feel the centuries of thought contained here. Philosophers, poets, scholars, all paused in a moment of serenity. You did that. You kept it alive. You were present. You mattered. And as your own eyes begin to flutter closed, picture the warm swirl of lamplight fading, the soft shuffles of scrolls sliding into their places, and the quiet rhythm of a library that has been lovingly tended. Let the comfort of gentle caretaking, the triumph of small victories, and the satisfaction of patience settle into your mind. Allow yourself to drift into the hush, knowing that the world is preserved in part because of your care, even if only in imagination tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sleep comes softly here, surrounded by the whispers of knowledge, the gentle sighs of ink, and the tender touch of preservation. Breathe deeply, relax fully. The scrolls are safe, and so are you.